Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, July 15th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will bring a high of 85.6 degrees and a low of 65.5. A pleasant day for many, so enjoy the sunshine, but remember to stay hydrated if you're spending time outdoors. Later in the program, we'll dive into the Supreme Court's decision that allowed for significant layoffs within the Education Department. We'll also cover the unconfirmed child exploitation claims that have surfaced in the wake of recent ICE raids conducted in California. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a major development from the nation's highest court that could significantly reshape the federal government's role in education. Yesterday, the Supreme Court delivered a significant, albeit temporary, ruling that allows the Trump administration to proceed with mass layoffs at the Department of Education. For more on this unfolding story, we turn to our reporter Ethan. Ethan, can you break down the Supreme Court's decision for us?
Grace, good to be here. Yes, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision yesterday, effectively hit the pause button on a lower court order. This means that nearly 1,400 employees at the Department of Education, who were slated to be reinstated, will now face layoffs. The court did this without providing a detailed explanation for their decision, according to reporting from NBC News and CBS News. It is a significant, if not exactly detailed, judicial curveball.
And what was the lower court's ruling that the Supreme Court has now paused?
That was a strong injunction from Massachusetts-based U.S. District Judge Myung Jun. Judge Jun had found that the administration's true intention was to, quote, effectively dismantle the department without an authorizing statute, end quote, a move he believed would, quote, likely cripple the department, end quote, and make it, quote, effectively impossible, end quote, for it to carry out its legally required responsibilities. This is according to NBC News, CBS News, and Government Executive.
Quote, effectively dismantle, end quote, is a strong phrase. What exactly are these layoffs part of, and what is the administration's stated goal?
Well, Grace, the layoffs, impacting approximately 1,378 employees, represent roughly 1/3 of the Department of Education's total workforce. They stem from an executive order signed by President Donald Trump in March of this year. That order directed Secretary of Education Linda McMahon to, quote, facilitate the closure of the Department of Education to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law, end quote, as reported by NBC News and CBS News. Secretary McMahon has publicly stated her intention to eliminate her department, describing it as embarking on its, quote, final mission, end quote. The administration frames these actions as, quote, streamlining the department and eliminating discretionary functions that, in the administration's view, are better left to the states, end quote. President Trump himself lauded the decision on Truth Social, calling it a, quote, major victory, end quote, that would allow the administration to proceed on returning the functions of the Department of Education, quote, back to the states, end quote.
So, essentially, a move to greatly reduce federal oversight in education. But this isn't without its opponents, is it? Who is challenging these actions?
Absolutely not. This has faced strong opposition and legal challenges from a powerful coalition. This includes 21 Democratic attorneys general, teachers' unions, and even specific school districts like Somerville and East Hampton. They argue that President Trump and Secretary McMahon are unlawfully attempting to reorganize the Department of Education without the necessary congressional authorization. New York Attorney General Letitia James countered in court papers, according to NBC News, that the move was, quote, arbitrary and capricious, contrary to law, and unconstitutional, end quote, asserting it improperly eliminated teams performing, quote, statutorily mandated tasks, end quote.
That sounds like a fundamental challenge to the executive's authority. How did this case make its way up to the Supreme Court?
After Judge Jones' initial injunction in May, the administration sought to pause his decision, but the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, based in Boston, rejected that bid on June 4th. That left the administration no option but to seek emergency relief from the Supreme Court, which they did. leading to yesterday's ruling. It has been a rapid legal ascent for this dispute.
And the Supreme Court's decision was 6-3, meaning the 3 liberal justices dissented forcefully. What did they say, particularly Justice Sonia Sotomayor?
Grace, Justice Sotomayor authored a truly blistering dissenting opinion, arguing that the majority was, quote, willfully blind, end quote, or, quote, naive, end quote, to the, quote, grave, end quote, threat to the Constitution's separation of powers. She asserted, according to NBC News, that the decision, quote, rewards clear defiance, end quote, of the Constitution. Justice Sotomayor even stated, quote, when the executive publicly announces its intent to break the law and then executes on that promise, it is the judiciary's duty to check that lawlessness, not expedite it, end quote, calling the decision, quote, indefensible, end quote. She also expressed concern about, quote, untold harm, end quote, to students. Skye Perryman, chief executive of Democracy Forward, called it a, quote, devastating, end quote, shadow docket decision. For those wondering, the, quote, shadow docket, end quote, refers to the court's emergency orders and summary decisions, which are often made without full arguments or explanations, as was the case here.
So this is a temporary green light for the layoffs. What's the next step in this legal battle, and is there a chance this will eventually be reversed?
That's right, Grace. This Supreme Court decision is not a final ruling on the merits of the case. It is a temporary measure, allowing the layoffs to proceed while the legal challenges continue through the appeals process. The case will now return to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit for arguments on its merits. As of today, July 15, 2025, the immediate timeline and next scheduled hearing date for the First Circuit have not yet been specified or announced. Ultimately, if necessary, the case could return to the Supreme Court for a full hearing. This legal education is far from over.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this complex and very important story for us. We appreciate your insights.
My pleasure, Grace.
When we come back, we'll turn our attention to our next story, which is also making headlines. Welcome back. We turn now to a story out of California that has sparked widespread controversy and deep concern, following a large-scale operation conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other Department of Homeland Security components. For more on this developing story, we go to our reporter Chloe. Chloe, what can you tell us about these recent raids?
Grace, these operations truly turned into a thorny issue, unfolding last Thursday, July 10th, 5 days ago, at Glass House Farms, a licensed California cannabis and agricultural grower, and other agricultural fields in Camarillo and Carpinteria, California. Federal agents were executing criminal search warrants. The operations led to the apprehension and detention of 361 immigrants suspected of being in the country illegally. This included at least 14 migrant children.
That's a significant number of people, and sadly, we've heard reports of a fatality during these raids. Can you elaborate on that, Chloe?
It's a truly grave situation, Grace. During the raid in Camarillo, a 57-year-old farm worker named Jaime Alanis tragically fell approximately 30 feet from a greenhouse roof. This happened 5 days ago, last Thursday, July 10th. He was reportedly hiding or fleeing from agents when he fell. Alanis, who had worked at the farm for 10 years and was the sole provider for his wife and daughter in Mexico, succumbed to his injuries on Saturday, July 12th, 3 days ago. He will be buried in Michoacan. According to Democracy Now!, his death marks a grim milestone. Identified as the, quote, first known person to die in an ICE raid as part of Trump's brutal immigration crackdown, end quote. While DHS stated Alanis was not in their custody or actively pursued when he fell, critics and his family strongly argue that ICE's chaotic actions or direct pursuit tragically contributed to his death.
And it wasn't just a tragic death. The reports also mention violent clashes and even a suspected shooting. What happened there?
That's right, Grace. The raids ignited hours-long standoffs between protesters and federal agents. Agents deployed military-style vehicles and tear gas on crowds, which included children, who were attempting to protect the farm workers. 4 U.S. citizens were arrested for, quote, assaulting or resisting officers, end quote, and some protesters were observed throwing rocks. Additionally, there's a serious ongoing investigation into an individual suspected of firing a gun at federal agents on July 10th near Camarillo. Thankfully, no injuries were reported from the gunfire, but the suspected shooter remains at large, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation is offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to their apprehension.
Beyond the immediate confrontations, the Department of Homeland Security justified these raids, citing concerns about child exploitation and trafficking. What's the latest on those allegations?
The DHS officials did indeed justify the raids by citing, quote, casework, end quote, indicating the presence of trafficked and exploited children. They reported, quote, rescuing, end quote, at least 14 migrant children from, quote, potential exploitation, forced labor, and human trafficking, end quote. 10 of these children, some as young as 14, were identified as unaccompanied minors and transferred to the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services. DHS also stated that among the individuals detained, 4 had prior criminal convictions, including for kidnapping, attempted rape, and attempted child molestation. However, Grace, federal officials have not publicly provided specific evidence to substantiate these claims of child exploitation or trafficking directly against Glass House Farms. The U.S. Attorney's Office has even declined to confirm an investigation. For their part, Glass House Farms has publicly denied employing minors or knowingly violating hiring practices, stating they complied with warrants and are assisting detained workers with legal representation. Separately, the California Department of Cannabis Control, or DCC, has confirmed an active state-level investigation into Glass House Farms initiated by a May 2025 complaint regarding minor employment. Interestingly, an earlier site visit found no minors. The DCC emphasized that employing individuals under 21 in the cannabis industry is strictly illegal, but clarified that it does not participate in ICE raids.
So it's a very complex web of allegations and investigations. How has the community and various advocacy groups reacted to these events?
The condemnation has been widespread, Grace. Oxnard Mayor Louise MacArthur condemned the, quote, aggressive, insensitive, end quote, actions and their human cost. The United Farm Workers Union denounced the, quote, violent and cruel federal actions, end quote, for terrorizing communities and separating families. They noted that teenagers commonly work in fields and that deporting children is not a solution for child labor. The Farm Bureau of Ventura County also cited racial profiling and intimidation, warning of threats to California's agricultural economy. U.S. Senator Alex Padilla criticized, quote, artificial quotas and, quote, risking lives, while even ICE Border Director Tom Homan called the death, quote, unfortunate, end quote. It's clear that this issue has harvested a lot of public outrage.
A truly difficult situation for all involved. Chloe, what's the latest on the ongoing investigations?
As of today, July 15th, 2025, Grace, investigations into immigration and potential child labor violations at the farms are ongoing. The suspected shooter remains at large, and the DCC's state-level investigation is active. No charges related to child labor or human trafficking have been publicly filed against Glass House Farms. The incident has truly intensified debates over immigration policy and worker safety during federal operations, highlighting the vulnerability of undocumented workers in the agricultural sector.
Chloe, thank you for digging deeper into these details and for that comprehensive report. It's certainly a story we'll continue to follow closely.
My pleasure, Grace.
We'll be right back after the break. Here are some other headlines. We begin this morning with the national security cloud hanging over the Defense Department. A bombshell ProPublica investigation, hitting headlines today, July 15, 2025, reveals a little-known Microsoft program that could leave the U.S. vulnerable to Chinese hackers. The report details how Microsoft employs engineers in China to help maintain the Pentagon's computer systems, often with minimal U.S. supervision. These digital escorts, meant to oversee the foreign engineers, frequently fall short on technical expertise and are paid low wages for this critical work. This arrangement, which has been in place for nearly a decade and was crucial for Microsoft securing federal cloud contracts, creates a significant vulnerability, risking sensitive U.S. data. The investigation found a surprising lack of awareness about this program, even within the Defense Department. This revelation comes as China is considered the leading cyber adversary, underscored by recent incidents like the 2023 Storm 0558 attack that infiltrated senior U.S. government mailboxes, leading the Cyber Safety Review Board to blame Microsoft for inadequate security. Shifting now to trade, where a major red light has been given to Mexican tomato imports. The U.S. has just slapped a 17.09% anti-dumping duty on most fresh Mexican tomatoes, effective immediately. This follows a breakdown in negotiations, a move aimed at boosting the domestic U.S. tomato industry, which claims it's been squeezed by unfairly low-priced Mexican produce. This decision terminates a tomato suspension agreement in place since 1996. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stated the decision aligns with President Trump's trade policies, asserting American farmers have been quote, by unfair practices. While Mexico supplies about 70% of the U.S. tomato market, critics warn this tomato tax will likely lead to higher prices for consumers, possibly climbing by 8.5%. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has called the U.S. decision unfair as trade tensions continue to simmer. Now a look at the devastating Central Texas floods, which turned the July 4th weekend into a torrent of tragedy. These catastrophic flash floods, primarily hitting the Texas Hill Country and especially Kerr County, struck in the early morning hours of July 4, 2025, after more than a week of relentless rain. The Guadalupe River swelled dramatically, with some areas rising by the height of a two-story building in less than an hour. As of July 14th, over 130 people are confirmed dead, with more than 160 still missing, 97 of those in Kerr County alone. This is now considered one of the deadliest natural disasters in Texas history. A significant number of fatalities occurred at Camp Mystic, a century-old all-girls summer camp, where at least 27 campers and counselors died. The massive search and rescue operation is painstakingly slow, hampered by enormous piles of debris and continued rain. Officials haven't found any survivors since July 4th, and the search for the missing is expected to take weeks, if not months, with Governor Greg Abbott pledging efforts will continue until every missing person is found. And finally, to Fall River, Massachusetts, where a devastating fire ripped through the Gabriel House Assisted Living Facility on Sunday night, July 13, 2025. This blazing tragedy resulted in the deaths of 9 residents and injured at least 30 others. Firefighters arriving just after 9:30 p.m. were met with heavy smoke and flames, with residents trapped inside screaming from windows. While some residents were rescued by ladder or police, harrowing accounts emerged. The deceased ranged in age from 61 to 86. The cause of the fire is under investigation, though authorities currently do not believe it to be suspicious. However, concerns are igniting regarding the response, with a firefighters' union claiming inadequate staffing hindered efforts. More disturbingly, some residents allege facility staff did little to help, with some reportedly running from the building and leaving residents to fend for themselves. The Gabriel House, which serves seniors who cannot afford higher-end assisted living, had about 70 residents before the fire. Survivors have been moved to temporary shelters, many in shock, having lost most of their belongings. That's all the time we have for these headlines this morning. Stay with us for more news after the break. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.